So the Niners, according to TJ Houshmandzadeh, if they would have offered Brandon Aiyuk $30 million per year, he would have said yes. That tells me that they're not offering him $30 million per year, which would
nothing gets by you, Dibs.
I'm just trying to,
seeing how you got this
walk
job.
the people through it, trying to.
Nothing gets past you.
That's right, Bill Burr. Don't miss him at the Greek. You're gonna sit on a concrete slab and and you get a laugh
or grass.
Exactly,
one of them,
depending on where your seats are. But what would they be offering him? And you look at some of the other deals that are out there, and the average annual for A.J. Brown, 32, and Calvin Ridley, he was 23. Right.
Well, Ridley is nowhere near Aiyuk.
Right, but just on the deals that just got signed.
What did Waddle get?
Waddle got 28.250.
28.250.
Right, and a guarantee of $36 million, which was a little bit more than Amon-Ra.
See, that's weird.
And that's a 3-year deal for $84.75 million over 28.25 million per year. And if that is, maybe that's the neighborhood where the Niners are thinking. Maybe they're even thinking lower than that.
It's interesting, though, because his guarantee is higher. That's usually what the player wants.
Right.
The AAV, less important. Then again, the AAV.
It's a 3-year deal, though, and not a 4. Amon-Ra's is 4.
Good point. Very good point.
That's why his guarantee is slightly higher.
And I also think that the fantasy football world's going to have a hard time with this. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's a phenomenal player.
Yeah.
Like phenomenal. Fantastic player. Would I rather have Brandon Aiyuk? Probably. I would. I think he's a little bit more dynamic, versatile of a receiver, more of a downfield guy. The fantasy football community is going to have a hard time with the idea of Aiyuk's better than Amon-Ra. Amon-Ra performs better when it comes to those just straight numbers. He went over 1,500 yards this year. But again, as we said, lots more targets. 3+ more targets per game in order to put those numbers up. What are your thoughts on that? The comparison between Aiyuk and Amon-Ra St. Brown. 888-957-9570. If you missed it, the relevancy of that is TJ Houshmandzadeh essentially just told us, which I think is opposite of what we were thinking. If they offered Aiyuk the Amon-Ra deal, he takes it. I think most of us, I know I was assuming he would get more. They're saying he has not been offered that and would sign it in a heartbeat. That is very revealing to me. Anthony in Hayward. Hey, Anthony, thanks for calling the show. What's up?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for making it.
I called in. Sorry about that. But for me, I think the situation and the context with the contract is, for Detroit, Amon-Ra means so much more to their team. I mean, Aiyuk, you guys could let go. You guys would definitely get worse. But he's not as vital to the team as Amon-Ra is to the Lions. So they're not willing to pay him that because he's not that much value to the team in terms of what Amon-Ra is to the Lions. I don't know. That's just kind of what I'm thinking. Let me take you guys' thoughts offline. But thanks again, guys.
All right, Anthony, thanks. Here's one thing I have a hard time with when it comes to contracts, which is his value to the team. I don't know if players come from that perspective when they are negotiating. I don't know if they do that. I rarely see that because look at what we're talking about. We're talking about comps around the league. This is what agents come to the table with. They're like, this guy got that, and here's where you sit based on that number, so now here's what you get. It gets real complex if you start doing value to the team.
Yeah.
And you make it just about this football team. A football player is looking at value based on the NFL, not just the team. This is the Draymond conversation that we've had so much. What would you pay Draymond Green if you were the Pistons? I don't know. Some people act like it'd be like, I don't know, $4. Because what the hell does he do for us? We're not winning. We don't have great shooters around him. That makes absolutely no sense. But he's super valuable to the Warriors. This becomes, I admit, a difficult conversation. But if you just say to Brandon, like if the Niners do sort of what you're suggesting, Anthony, and say, we don't throw the ball as much around here, so you're not as valuable. I got an easier sentence for you that you can use. Hey, Brandon, goodbye.
Yeah, they're not going to let him.
Doesn't work that way.
They're not just going to let him go. They're going to hardball him and make him play on his 5th-year option,
and then he can leave.
Exactly. Or they can franchise him like you talked about before, which they're not going to do. They don't use the franchise tag, but I'm sure the 49ers are getting into these negotiations. And like TJ Houshmandzadeh said, if they were offered the $30 million a year, Brandon signs that. Well, the Niners are looking at Amon-Ra and saying, all right, he's third in the league in catches with 119. Brandon, you had 75. You were tied for 31st. So you're not as important. You're not as good, maybe, to use the G word, as Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you're not getting the $30 million a year, even though you can look at other metrics and you can look at other things. And the importance of Brandon Aiyuk to a team that actually wins and goes to the Super Bowl, he's got more import than his numbers would reflect. But when you're doing this negotiation, I'm sure the team is looking at the numbers and playing hardball with him.
For sure. But again, you can twist those numbers however you want.
Yep, absolutely.
And I do think the further you go into the numbers, this is just my, and this is a super sort of sophomoric kind of or simple way of saying it, because I'm not in there studying all of the advanced metrics. I think the further you go into analytics for wide receivers, the better Brandon gets, especially when compared with the rest of the league. We could give you, if again, you're just basing it on last year, we could give you a bunch of numbers that show that Brandon Aiyuk was probably the most quote-unquote effective wide receiver in the league. Now, I don't necessarily think that's accurate. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways you could look at this.
Yeah, it depends on what you value, too. And I think if you're the 49ers, to the caller's point, they don't throw the ball as much as, well, any other team. They threw it the 32nd most in the NFL. Therefore, they could argue he's not as important because they don't throw it as much. But the other side of it is, because we don't throw it that much, doesn't Brandon Aiyuk then become more valuable? Because when you do throw it, you give it to a guy who was second in the league in yards per reception, and he actually was 9th in the league in yards per game. Even though you don't throw it a lot, he still was 9th in the league in yards per game.
No doubt. Let me give you another sort of angle on this as far as stats are concerned. I saw this on a social media site earlier today having to do with fantasy football. And we're kind of at that time of year where people are starting to throw out these predictive stats.
Right.
Hey, when you get to your draft here in a couple of months, take a look at this. And here's the trend. And like I actually saw, the 49ers, here's one real simple stat to throw on to you. The experts project that the 49ers will be the highest scoring team in the league. Highest scoring team in the NFL. They are projected to have the most points out of any team in the NFL. So get your Niners, right? That's number one. But number two, almost every quarterback in the history of the league, if you look at the stat touchdown percentage, that can be predictive, both positive and negative. Touchdown percentage, meaning the percentage of their throws that end up in the end zone. If the number is 7 or higher, almost every time in the history of the league, there is a regression to the average when your percentage is 7% or higher. Only once has a player in the history of the league had a touchdown percentage of 7% or higher as a quarterback, followed it up by doing it again the next year. His name was Aaron Rodgers. One time.
Brock last year was 7%.
7%.
At 7.
Why do you think he was 7%? I would argue that one of the very, very key people in that stat was Brandon Aiyuk. Because I already see some people saying, what the hell was Brandon before they had Brock? Well, I do think that works both ways. And so be very, very careful with the mere concept of Niners don't throw it very much, and therefore wide receiver, not as valuable, already got a good quarterback. I don't think this is the same as Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes and, hey, just move his top receiver out of there and you're still going to get your 12 wins. I don't think it's that simple with the Niners. Brandon Aiyuk was, if you watch the games, the big catches, the tough catches, the third down catches, and the downfield catches. They belonged to Brandon Aiyuk last year. He was a big deal. He was a big deal on a great team. And so this idea that he's not as valuable because Niners, I don't think I agree with that.
Well, I'm not saying I agree with it either, but when you look at what we are now learning from TJ Houshmandzadeh about what would be accepted by Brandon Aiyuk, and you can then do the math and figure out what has or has not been offered by the 49ers, and you look at other contracts that have been signed, I'm sure the 49ers are looking at this situation, and maybe they don't value Brandon Aiyuk as highly as certainly he thinks that he should be valued, and they used first-round draft capital to draft a wide receiver.
Yep, although they did that for him too. You know what I mean? Like obviously, they think incredibly highly of Brandon Aiyuk. They traded up in the first round to get him,
right?
And then and he has now paid them off with a 1,300-yard season and a Super Bowl appearance.
But most recently in this year's draft, they drafted a receiver. So It's not that they drafted a receiver because they don't like Brandon Aiyuk or they don't want Deebo Samuel around. They did it because they want to get better, and they had a player there that they thought could come in and be good. But it also is a little bit of a shot across the bow to Brandon Aiyuk that, if things don't work out, your replacement could already be in the building.
Connor and San Leandro next up on Willard and Dibs. Hey, Connor, what are you doing?
Hey guys, what's up?
What's happening?
Just want to weigh in on this Aiyuk piece. I think in a year from now, if we're all talking about Ricky Pearsall, quote unquote, being in the doghouse, this entire conversation we're going to look back on and think, wow, we really should have valued Aiyuk more. I mean, I think before the draft, this chess master theory that Kyle Shanahan uses all his players in a very specific way, and so we don't value Aiyuk as much. I wish, if that was true, that John Lynch would have kept that in mind when we were figuring out whether to trade him before the draft, because then we could have gotten something rather than nothing. I mean, with Trey Lance, we ended up trading him away for a fourth. I think we have trouble getting value as we think. Like when we decide whether to trade folks, we're always thinking about market value. But if we have some other way of calculating players' value when we pay them, that should factor in when we make decisions about how much we're willing to trade them for. That's all I want to say.
Connor, I think it's a very, very fair point. Let me add this. Now, this is just me talking. TJ is obviously very tight with Brandon Aiyuk and knows kind of the state of Brandon's mind. I'm not yet taking the 49ers stance on June 6th to be what their stance is going to be in August. Is that annoying if you're Brandon? Is that
sure? Is
that personal if you're Brandon? Frustrating? Infuriating? Is it all of those things? Absolutely. But it's not to me because it's not my contract, and I've watched the way the 49ers operate. I think they'll come up. So in other words, the reason I answer it that way is I don't think, like you saying the Niners don't value Brandon highly enough, therefore they should have traded him when his value was high. I think the 49ers do value Brandon that much. They're just doing what they do. Parag Marathe literally teaches a negotiating class at Stanford and once told me it's almost a habit of his. Like he does it when the family is talking about where to go to dinner. And if he's got somewhere he wants to go and his wife wants to go somewhere else, he will start to use, I shouldn't say this on the radio, but
negotiating tactics.
He's using, it's kind of like the way Kobe talked about competing in his house.
Right.
They would compete when they were eating. It doesn't matter what it is. We're competing. For Parag, doesn't matter what it is. We're negotiating. So the idea that Parag would just give you what you want on June 6th, he's just opposed to the mere idea. Whether he's going to end up there or not is not the point. I'm not going to meet your price on June 6th because why? No.
It's June 6th. Right.
Yeah. So I don't think that this is as much as TJ and Brandon may feel that way. I don't think today is reflective of what they actually think about Brandon Aiyuk.
Right, but there is damage that can be done through the negotiation and through the process of it. And if Brandon Aiyuk is feeling frustrated or if he's feeling angry and maybe it doesn't translate into him playing the kind of quality football that he needs to play, and maybe he ends up not going to camp on time. And TJ even mentioned, a hamstring or a groin or something that could happen because you're not in camp. And once you do get into camp and the adrenaline starts ramping up and you start to go full bore and you're not as prepared to be out there doing everything that you should have been doing before, these things can have an